All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our interview series, The Black Legends of Hapoel Tel Aviv, where I interview former great African-American players who played for Hapoel. I'm here today with Andrew Walker, who played for Hapoel from 1981 to 1983. Mr. Walker, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you for having me. 1 second, Joe.
Oh, yes, sir. No problem.
I'll call you right back. I'm on a Zoom. Okay, I'll call you right back. Thank you. Bye-bye. I'm sorry about that.
No worries. No worries. I understand. So we'll start here. After you finished your career at Niagara in 1976, you were drafted by the then New Orleans Jazz in the NBA. You played for them for about a season. And then it was difficult for me, actually, as I'm trying to online find sort of your career history. There's kind of a gap between the end of that season and you joining Hapoel in 1981. So what were you up to in that in those years between the Jazz and going to Israel?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll fill in those gaps for you. Actually, after I left the Jazz, whichever year that was, I was invited to the camp in Atlanta Hawks. And I spent that next season, beginning of that next season at the rookie camp again, in which I thought I did extremely well, but Frank Layden and Hubie Brown thought differently because of the no-cut contracts. Back then, it was more to stay in, not necessarily to get in the league, but to stay in the league, because no-cut contracts meant that they had a spot on their team with even out Jack Goose Gibbons and Butch Lee and those guys who didn't really show up to camp, and the ones who did, that got sent home because they weren't performing as well as they should have, being that he was a #1 draft pick out of Kentucky, and I took care of that. But a long story short, that didn't work out well. Although when I read the papers on my way home, they said that I was going to make the team, but again, those no-cut contracts fell into place, and that sort of nixed me with the numbers game. But I ended up in Germany that year. To Germany, I played for a team called TuS Damm, which was in Aschaffenburg, Germany, not far from Frankfurt. So I spent the season there. After that season, I came back, and actually my class graduated in 76. I didn't get my degree until 79. So I went back and finished my degree in 79. And so that was the gap there. I was like 8 credits or some odd credits short. And it was very important for me and my mom and everybody else that I get that degree. I was so close. So I spent a half a semester finishing up at Niagara. They honored my scholarship, etc. So I stayed on campus there and finished up. And then coming home that year after graduating, that's when I was playing in the Bob Douglas League, which is a offshoot like of the Rucker, but it was actually in Queens. And you got all the the NBA ball players, European ball players, European scouts, et cetera, et cetera. So I think they followed me a couple of games. And at the time, Al Walden was my attorney, agent, and friend. He was a state senator at the time as well. And I was getting into the business, so I used him as my agent, and things matured and ended up at Hapoel Tel Aviv.
Gotcha. Okay, that's wonderful. So when you knew that when you went back to school to finish up those remaining credits and get your degree, that you had every intention of continuing your professional basketball career after that.
Absolutely. A matter of fact, I was in constant when I was coming back. Actually, during that process of getting to Hapoel Tel Aviv, I ended up being my bachelor's in physical education. I ended up being a phys ed teacher in the interim at Brooklyn Junior Academy. And I remember myself going down in the old days on a rotary phone and putting coins in the phone and calling Frank Layden. And at that time now, the Jazz had moved to Utah, and calling up, and I guess that didn't work out well because they had a guard named John Stockton there, so he wasn't anywhere. So that's when I said, okay, enough at the NBA, and then I was fortunate enough to land in Israel.
Got you. Okay, so I guess the initial so your agent was the one who initially kind of connected you to Hapoel Tel Aviv?
Yes.
And so what was your initial reaction to the prospect of playing professionally in Israel? I know you said you'd already played overseas in Germany, but like very different regions, being in Europe and then being, in the Middle East, where Israel is. So what was your initial reaction to the prospect of that?
Well, I was, my mom always embedded in us traveling was, even though we didn't travel far, but we always went south for summers, and traveling was part of our institution in regards to who we were as a family, not being scared to move and go places. Matter of fact, I grew up in the Queensbridge houses, which is infamous projects in New York City, probably the biggest public housing development in the country. Queensbridge, Nas and Ron Artest,
Wow.
all those guys have come from the Long Island City and Queensbridge houses, and also a gentleman called Willie Sims. Willie Sims went to LSU, got drafted by the Denver Nugget, but Willie is as black as you and I, but he's a Jew. And he ended up at, I want to say, Maccabi, not Maccabi Tel Aviv, but Maccabi Haifa. I believe he was at Maccabi Haifa. And Willie had I think he's still over there. Willie, I said, was a Jewish, and had the documentation to state that. So I knew about Willie being over in Israel when I was going over there. And we hooked up a couple of times, played against each other. I fell out of contact with Willie, unfortunately. He was went to the same high school.
Wow.
Long Island City High School. He was behind me, but great guy, great kid, great family. As I've said, he made his career, made his lifestyle, spoke Hebrew, the whole bit. So I believe he's still over there. But children, the whole 9 yards, I hope everything is going well for him, so I wasn't that ill familiar with Israel as a thought. Being that I knew Willie was going over there, was over there at the time.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes perfect sense. And so I guess that was kind of your introduction to Israel was through Willie Sims, kind of your conversations with him and what he told you about his experiences over there.
Right. And like I mentioned, the name came up in the last interview you did, and he was very influential and very inspiration of Barry Leibowitz. Mm-hmm. Barry was a New Yorker, and went from New York to Israel, and LA, I guess, was his route. And Barry was one of those guys who made you feel very comfortable being over there at the time, because you could relate to him, being that he was from New York, from the States, and also a legend over there in Israel.
Right. Yeah.
Especially Hapoel Tel Aviv.
Yeah, no doubt. Probably our club's greatest player. And then I think he also played on the Israel national team when they went pretty far in like the European Championship.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he was a big name.
Yep, certainly. All right, so let's see here. So I know you said that you had played in Germany. Had you done any other traveling abroad before going to Israel to play for Hapoel Tel Aviv?
Not really. I remember one time during one of the summers, I can't exactly put my finger on it, but a group of us NBA ball players out of New York mostly went down to the Dominican Republic and played a few games down there. I remember being down there where it was a trying time, because I think Dominican was going through a coup at the time. So there was a lot of security down there. I think Moses Malone was down there with us, and Dr. J, and it was a fun time. But it's one of those blurs in your memory that you're being in Dominican Republic, and you're in a hotel, and they got guards outside your door,
right
outside the hotel. And as I said, it was a trying time, because I think that particular time, if my memory serves me correct, it was that they were going through a coup had happened. So, when a coup happens, it's mostly military. So that's why the military presence there at the time. But that's about the only time, other than the times I went to Europe, in Germany, and of course in the Middle East, in Israel.
Gotcha. Okay. So I guess what was your experience like as a Black American man living in Israel?
Well, I loved it. I mean, to be honest with you, if I could have stayed long, I would have. But sometimes you have limits, and then you just say the time is up. But the time in which I was there, I really enjoyed the culture. I enjoyed the fact that, in my view, it wasn't the color of the skin that they looked at as opposed to who you are as a person. I don't know if that's changed. I hear different rumors or different things from people who are Israelis who I've had conversations with here, and they said things have changed with the influx of more immigrants, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, right.
But during my time there, I really, I lived in Tel Aviv for 3 years, and I lived in Jerusalem for a year. But I never had, in my own personal opinion, my wife and my 2 daughters were over there at the time as well. We enjoyed it immensely. I look at it as a time and place where if I ever had an opportunity to go back, I would. And I did go back even after I stopped playing over there. I ended up bringing it when I was at Niagara. I got a team together of about 8 kids, 8 young men, and brought them back over there about 2 years later to see if they could get jobs over there. I think 1 or 2 of them stuck it out there. But
Wonderful.
I had a great experience over there. I wish I could have spoke more of the language over there, but it's very difficult. And most people will speak English to you, so it really wasn't a pressing issue in regards to having to learn Hebrew, other than the fact that it'd have been nice to learn a little bit more. But I understand the language in terms of listening to it. And living in Brooklyn, not far from Williamsburg, you see a little culture shock from people who don't really realize what Jerusalem and parts of Israel look like when you're in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. It's like being in Little Jerusalem, in a sense.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting. So how would you compare, I guess, adjusting to the culture in Israel with like adjusting to the culture in Germany? What would you say was more of a I guess a shock or more different for you?
In my own opinion, it was like a night and day. In a sense, of course, I go back to Germany first, and during the Carter years, it wasn't a really pretty time overseas with the army and things of that nature at that period of time. Culturally, Germans are a little stoic. Culturally, not as friendly or as going to approach you. I mean, especially when that they think you're in the military if you're African American, number one.
Right.
Number two, they're just not, in my opinion, the warmest individuals sometimes with. But nonetheless, they are professional, and they were professional, and everything was by the book over there, and so it was a different culture. But going back now, pushing forward to Israel, it was a whole different vibe. Being in Tel Aviv was like being it was a cosmopolitan city. You could sit down in a restaurant, you can sit next to anybody. They identified you as an American basketball player. We didn't have any type of services over there, in Israel at the time. So they knew that you played Kedusal, which is basketball. So they could strike up a conversation almost anywhere, anytime with anybody.
Wow, that's awesome.
So the vibe was very, 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 very good. Enjoyed the lifestyle. Yeah. Sun, the weather was fantastic. Even in January, February, you got 75 degrees, and so you could still be at the beach, even though the natives wouldn't be at the beach. They thought that was too cool. But for somebody from New York, 75 in January is a treat.
Right, it's a good deal.
Right, exactly. So no, but I enjoyed my stay there for sure. Unfortunately, I got ill over there, which I think sort of threw me back a little bit. I had because when we traveled to Eastern Europe at the time, like Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, and in Germany as well. We played in the Chorus Cups. And if you ever played there in the wintertime, they had no heat. Be playing in the gym in your wow. and jerseys, and people in the stands would wear mink coats. So you knew something was wrong. And unfortunately, I came back from one of those trips and I caught walking pneumonia. So I was knocked out for a good 2 months or more. I mean, I couldn't breathe. I lost about 20 pounds.
Oh man.
That's what really derailed me a little bit from my last third year into going to Jerusalem.
Gotcha.
I lost so much weight and strength, and I couldn't really recover to the point where I was when I first got there.
Yeah.
Walking pneumonia, I don't wish that pneumonia, you can call it pneumonia, you want to call it anything. I don't wish that on anybody because I felt like dying some days, literally. I couldn't breathe and my lungs were, but then, what was rewarding was that when I did go to the hospital, they took care of me and made sure that I was comfortable and et cetera, et cetera. And it wasn't my heart, it wasn't anything, it was just my lungs being infected. And I knew it was being in those cold gyms.
Yeah.
That cold air and that infecting your body. Yeah, that threw me for a loop. But listen, you learn, you live and learn, and you become stronger because of it.
Certainly, certainly. All right. Well, let's see here. So moving on to specifically, I guess, your experiences with Hapoel Tel Aviv. What was your first impression of the club when you signed there?
Well, again, very professional. Israelis, like you mentioned, Avan Plada, is one of the owners of the team or one of the guys who supported the team. I remember the guy Pico was like a team manager, very funny guy, very, engaging gentleman, always helping out. The players on the team was a mixture of some Americans, some, of course, Israelis, some in the military, of course. At the time I was one of the guys who had dual citizenship, actually. So I was an Israeli coming in, and they figured that piece out. And so it was that kind of an engaging environment. So, I fully, dove into the culture and the team. And I mean, it was a different style of ball initially over there in terms of how, you look at a fast break here and a fast break there. As you well know, from European ball players today, they go from the outside in, not from the inside out. The game was more or less running at a V outward to the 3-point arc, as opposed to running and stopping at the foul line, looking for the dish. And the game has changed since Hapoel Tel Aviv back when I was there to a game where it is now, and everything is the 3 and it starts from the outside, like I said, in. But that's where Europeans began. I mean, that's why they're so efficient in the NBA, because they don't play the type of game, although they play the game in the NBA like they did overseas back then, where the 6'10" guy was shooting jumpers,
right?
As opposed to posting up. They didn't really have that post up play. Even the lanes were different. The lanes were wider.
Right.
Even a post up, you still would be like 12, 15 feet away from the basket. So you had to, have an outside game, a turnaround game, and shoot jumper. So that in that regard, it was hard. And the coaching, I would say this, one knock about being over there, coaching wasn't as good as the coaching that you would have gotten from an American coach, because I think they were more or less textbook coaches, not necessarily having played the game, but learning the game. And a lot of the training, as you probably know, that everybody who's an Israeli has to serve in the military. So a lot of the training was military type mentality training, not really conditioning basketball training.
Interesting.
I think when you talk about the Europeans, as opposed to some even Israelis, Europeans were ahead in that game as well, because they really conditioned towards the game itself, whereas Israelis conditioned as if they were going to a fight.
Gotcha. That's fascinating. Yeah, I'd never considered that difference. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. So let's see here. Do want to talk a bit about the fans as well. So Hapoel Tel Aviv fans are known for being, some of the most passionate fans in Israel. What were your experiences like with the fans, and how would you compare that with, I guess, fans that you played in front of in the NBA in New Orleans as well as in Germany?
Well, I'll take what we're talking about first, and the passion of the Hapoel Tel Aviv fans, which is, was very high. And, not only games, but practices. I mean, people would be in there watching us practice.
Mm.
And you get paid really to practice more so than you get paid to play, because you had to show up every day to practice, because you only played maybe once, maybe twice a week.
Right.
Mostly only once a week. So your practice was like, your game, in a sense, that's how they would evaluate you each and every day, by how you practice. So it was critically important. And that was all the teams. Practice was the thing that they judged you on. Practice was the reason why you got on the court in regards to the minutes that you played. And if they thought that things weren't going well, one thing about playing overseas, they send you right home. You get a ticket, a one-way ticket back to where you came from, and you pass by the guy who they bring in right behind you.
Right.
So they have a Rolodex of players who they can always call if they feel that they have a need. And connection. So that was one of the things. But you can go in different parts, even Israel, and the passion would be even more intense in certain places than other places. You go up north, where at the time was the war 82, the Lebanese border. So those fans were crazy, because you get the soldiers up there who are war rugged. I mean, they were the fighters. I mean, they were the guys on the front line of the 82 war, which was going on at the time when we were in Israel at the time. The fans are passionate everywhere. European fans are more laid back, more sophisticated in regards to basketball, because I think even during the time when we played, although there were hotbeds in Madrid and hotbeds in Italy and other places in the Eastern European countries, they were more laid back and more sophisticated. And basketball wasn't the premier sport in any area of Europe. Right. It was always soccer, football, as they call it there. So that's where they're really passionate, even in Israel as well. Soccer was really a passionate sport in both Europe and in the Middle East, very passionate. But the fans for Hapoel Tel Aviv and Maccabi Tel Aviv were extremely passionate about Maccabi and Hapoel and the rival. And, it was like David and Goliath type of situation.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see here. Okay. All right, great. So let's see. So Hapoel Tel Aviv fans, we are known for being very politically engaged and politically liberal. A lot of leftists follow the club. And so were you familiar, or did you have any awareness of sort of the politics of the club while you were there?
Yeah, I did. I mean, like I said, I was always interested in politics as I came back into the States and got involved more with politics as well. And I knew it was more, and let's face it, Israel, and I have no problem with it, is a democratic socialist country. Yes. In a sense, socialism. And that's why I don't mind that word, although you use it here, you think you're talking about communism.
Right.
I mean, if anything, we got social programs left and right here.
Absolutely.
When you call it socialism, then all of a sudden people go, you're too far left, you're too far this, you're too far that. And in reality, it works to me personally, because I see how they treat their own, and they treat their own like babies, which is good. I mean, the social services in Israel was good. I mean, the fact that you had to put your life on the line, every single person had to serve in the military, took care of you until you were 18. And then, I saw things over there that I said, damn, I wish it was the same way over here. In terms of how they take care of people, and in terms of, how people respect each other's lives and how cherishing lives are to them. So I love that culture, and I love the fact that, socialism isn't a bad thing. When you're taking care of children, when you're taking care of the old, when you're taking care of, you got to put other things ahead of it in terms of what you have to do in terms of service, but sometimes it's worth it, So I looked at that, and, Hapoel Tel Aviv, the fans being the engine to drive the train mostly. And, like I mentioned, Avam Plada, he had an ownership piece in that as well. But these are all good people. I wish I could have made a little bit more money, obviously, but, suffice to say, it was good enough in regards to being able to save the money that I earned. So it wasn't really like I earned a lot, but what I earned, I didn't have to spend, so that was
Right.
the thing in regards to, having transportation. Like I said, being in Tel Aviv, you didn't have to go anywhere. You can get on a bus and you can walk, you can be wherever you needed to be within 5-10 minutes of any place you wanted to go. So that was a luxury in a sense.
Yeah, so that makes perfect sense. And I agree. I agree 100% with that. I think you and I, we probably have a pretty similar politics. So that's awesome. So how were you received by your teammates at Hapoel, and what was your relationship like with them?
Well, you don't become real friends with. First of all, you come in with the quote unquote. I think you can see my jersey in the background there.
Mm-hmm.
As back in the day, my son gave it to me for Father's Day. But anyway, you're not going to befriend 18, 19-year-old kid who's in the military, who's playing on your team. You've mostly hung out with some of the American guys. Kenny Lebanowski was on the team at the time. And everybody sort of went their own way. Your friends probably might have been outside the game of basketball itself. They had some guys at Maccabi Tel Aviv that you would run into. But for the most part, I had a family there for the most part of my stay there. But even with that being said, they came in 2 or 3 or 4 months later before I settled in. I had to settle in first and get things situated before they came over. But pretty much everybody stayed within their own lane, more or less. I hung out with Barry a couple of times, but I would say Barry probably was my I wouldn't say a best friend, but a friend that I can go and have a beer with, go and have a meal with, talk to, et cetera, et cetera. So, I would say he and Kenny Lebanowski was somebody I would hang out with occasionally. But, after practice, the Mediterranean was right at our doorstep. We'd go right to the beach, right from the practice, or walk home, or whatever the case might be. So, you didn't really become friends with a lot of Israelis, but you knew that they knew who you are outside the game itself, with outside your team. I was fortunate enough, which was really a blessing, that my mom and dad came over and visited for about a week and a half and watched a couple of our games over there, and they treated them royally. That was really something special, being that my mom and dad really didn't love to fly. And for them to fly from New York City to Tel Aviv, that was a treat and a half. I mean, I was so happy to see them on the bus rides going back and forth to the game. So they got rest their souls. They got a taste of being in the holy city. And
that's awesome.
Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. So, they can always put that feather in that. So as I told you, traveling was in our blood. My mom and dad, my mom took my dad over there. Like to fly, but they took that 13-hour flight, whatever it took, and they came to see us, and that was a beautiful sight.
That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds similar to the dynamic with my parents. Yeah, my dad is a bit he's not as big on traveling, but my mom, she'll drag him wherever it is.
That's right.
She thinks we need to go. So that's awesome.
That's right.
All right. So let's see here. I'd want to talk to you about, or want to ask a couple questions about the rivalry. You mentioned it a bit earlier between Maccabi Tel Aviv and Hapoel Tel Aviv. In fact, actually, the only game I know how to ask you about footage from those from your playing days, because the only footage I could find was actually from, I want to say it was the 1983 Cup final between Maccabi and Hapoel. So I wanted to ask you, what was the atmosphere like for those rivalries between Hapoel Tel Aviv and Maccabi Tel Aviv, those games?
Well, when we play the games, and my mind is so foggy, I've been doing so much in my life, but I remember the game was played at the Yad Eliyahu, which was the Maccabi Tel Aviv stadium home court. So, you were at a deficit right away. Referees were, again, you talk about coaching was a little deficient. Referees were, I wouldn't say on the take or anything like that, but they knew who was supposed to win the game.
Right. That's hilarious.
They definitely, and there was no shame in their game.
Right.
Like being here, there was no accountability. Let's put it that way. you could curse and you could say anything you want. They didn't make no difference to them. They were gonna referee the game the way they wanted to, and they would screw you like a top.
Oh man, that's rough.
That goes anywhere you went in Israel. You better run to your seat because you ain't gonna get. You're not gonna. You better beat them by 20 points. You ain't gonna get out there in no close game on the road. Heck no. And Maccabi Tel Aviv, that's like the Maccabi Tel Aviv's like on the mountaintop.
Right.
That's Moses. That's Moses' team. So when it comes time cup time, Hapoel Tel Aviv didn't have much of a chance against Maccabi. Maccabi, the ruling league, ruling club in Israel.
Yeah, and especially during your time there, they were really at the height of their powers. Had won.
Yeah. Well, they had money. They had money.
Right. Yep.
They had a lot of money they could throw at. Excuse me. They got a lot of money they could throw at players, and they bought a lot of good players. Along with having Mickey Berkowitz and some other known players is another known Israeli standout, Mickey Berkowitz. I think he played at UNLV, and I think he sniffed in the NBA, maybe a couple of tryouts or something like that. But very well established guy at the time. Olsey Perry, Earl Williams. They had some nasty cats back in those days, man. And they knew they could get away with anything.
Yeah.
And they pushed the envelope all the way to the edge. And not only pushed it to the edge, they threw it over the edge. So they got away with murder. I won't say that, but they got
right. Yeah, that's up against the wall, I'm sure. That's a tough situation.
Yeah. Hey, listen, that's life, man. You learn a lot by those types of situations. Because that's as my dad always said, everything's a setup.
Right. Hey, that's real. That's real. Hey, I can dig. That's a good line. I'm gonna have to tell some of my students that. That's good. But all right, so let's see here. As let's move to wrap this interview up. What are your fondest memories of playing for Hapoel?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm gonna circle back to I'm not gonna talk about when I got sick, but I'm gonna talk about when my mom and dad came over. That was a memory going there, being in Jerusalem City with them and being by the camels and all that. And then of course playing, when I first got there, it was so exciting. And being able to walk around and after practice have no shirt on and walk around with sandals on, and you felt liberated in a sense, even though at that time I didn't really feel the reverberations of what everybody else in that country was feeling in regards to the '82 war, but I feel is a state, a country in which I'm not saying they're used to it, but they live every day like it's their last day, so they won't let that type of an environment infiltrate the way they feel about life in general. So you felt that vibe all the time. It wasn't like, unfortunately, you talk about 9/11 and the tragedy of 9/11 in New York City and throughout the country, and the whole place was like down and, sad.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not saying people didn't feel it, but Israelis lived their life like it's the last day, and there was no other catastrophe like that other than the fact that they were constantly at war, whether it be Lebanon or the Middle East or Egypt and like that. So their mentality in regards to how they felt about life was one of which they enjoyed the minute and the hours and the days in which they had. So.
I can dig it. All right, so the last question we'll have here. Is there any message you'd like to share with Hapoel fans? I think it may come as a surprise, I think, to many, specifically like American players and Black American players that play for the club and then come back to the United States, that how fondly many of our players are remembered in Israel. So is there any message you'd like to leave for the fans?
Yeah, save me a spot on the bench one day. I might come back. Who knows?
Yeah.
But seriously, no, I would love to, life always takes a lot of twists and turns. And, as I wind down in my career, once I get this situation started and at LaGuardia Community College. I can't put a time frame on it, but I'd love to come back and visit Israel and see who's still around and
Right.
clubs. And I don't know if Hapoel is still up and running right now. Is it still a club that's viable?
Yes. So yeah, so to update you on that, I know, and I actually read an article, an interview that you did in 2006 with an Israeli publication. So the club ownership of the club had gone under, and that's when the fans actually came in and bought the club and saved it.
Okay,
So,
gotcha.
Yeah, we're doing pretty good right now. We're going to be in the Euro Cup next year, so we're doing good right now.
Okay, good. Yeah, well, that's even more important than for me from what I said though. Then because now that I know that they're still alive, because I had read something where they were going under for a minute or two.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of sad about that because I know it was a staple. I mean, there's no basketball unless it's Maccabi and Hapoel Tel Aviv,
Mm-hmm.
the two biggest rivals. But with that being said, yeah, I would love to come back and walk in that gym and like I said, I have fond memories of Israel and Tel Aviv and being over there. And I hope that I'm blessed with the time after I finish doing what I need to do here to visit back and go back and hang out, maybe touch base with Barry and see where he's at, see if he can hook me up.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm gonna stop recording. I have a couple more things I'll say after the recording here. All right.